Everything in the 101 is in the 101. And then they came back to Land Rover and said, because the replacement was never there or never good enough to replace it. So it just kept going, kept soldiering on. Well guys, welcome to another one. This one is a really cool one. I find this one quite an interesting little story. The Land Rover Llama. You might have heard of it, maybe not. That's why I'm here, to try and share this stuff, because it's just so fantastically interesting, fascinating really. The whole history of Land Rover, obviously. The Llama came about in 1985, and essentially it was to be the replacement for the 101 forward control. The 101 forward control was specifically made for the military back in the day. It was started development in the late 60s to be a gun tractor. That's basically what they were looking for. What it needs to do is carry about a ton of weight and tow a 2-ton field gun, which was quite a tall order for a 109 to do. It's not going to work. They came up with the 101 forward control. This was a pretty good little design as well. It looks really strange. It's a shoebox. It's completely square, maximizing all the space you can, specifically for air transportability as well. So it's a square box, and it was rather good at what it did. It functioned really well. Just by the 80s, there were some limitations, which I'll get to in a moment as well. And the military was looking around for a replacement for their gun tractor. And what they came up with was putting out tenders. Basically, they didn't go to Land Rover and say, guys, develop us a new version of the 101. They basically put out a tender. It needed to be 2-ton payload, so things had ratcheted up. And they were trying to standardize things across their NATO involvement, which was increasing as well, where the 101 was specifically British Army only with its quirks. So Land Rover started development, and I thought, yes, we can do this. And specifically, they also wanted to keep a lot of the military contracts in-house. And if you think about people like marshals, which we know from the ambulances, they do all the ambulance body work and that. And Reynolds, Borton, also a specific engineering company who modify existing vehicles for the military. And Land Rover thought we can take some of that pie as well, something to keep the Solihull plant moving. So I thought, let's come out with the Land Rover Llama. And this was a forward control cab over, they call it as well. It's similar to a Toyota Dyna, or a Nissan Cab Star, or a Mitsubishi Canter, something like that kind of range. It's not a massive truck either. It's quite compact. And in fact, they used the 110, a lot of the 110 components to do this. The basic chassis, which was strengthened, thicker steel. They used the driveline, the engine, the V8. They got the LT85 gearbox. They got the LT230 behind that. And they had specific axles for this one. The axles were much wider than a 110 because the whole cab was wider now. But basically a lot of the components that went into it were basically from the 110 production line, as it were. Also to keep costs down, commonality of parts as well, which is always interesting for the military. And they thought it would be easier to do as well. What they came up with was the front cab. The cab was made of fiberglass, obviously a steel frame. Inside it was a lot of 110 components, like the dashboard, the seats, all of that stuff. Underneath, Salisbury axles, they were wider. Some say up to 12 inches wider, which is quite a lot. And obviously the coil springs. Their payload, which they could do, was about 1.8 tons. Not quite there, but good enough. And they thought, let's send this out to Chertsey and let the Army have a look at this. And by then, things were also going differently by the MOD. So the military procurement process was also a little bit different. Whereas budgets were getting tighter and tighter. And a recurring theme as we get to know this stuff more and more, that's basically how things went. The money was never there. So the Llama went to Chertsey. They built 11 prototypes to do all the testing, and the Army put it through its paces. And then they came back to Land Rover and said, no, this is not good enough. And the problem was the inherent design was something which couldn't really be fixed. And that was, if you know anything about off-roading, if you're on an off-camber on a coil-sprung vehicle, it is much more unstable than leaf springs. It bounces a lot more, and the tipping point, especially when you're loaded. So imagine the Llama with a 2-ton payload on top on a side slope. That wasn't going to work. Along with that, the engine wasn't good enough. It wasn't able to produce enough power, especially under full load. They had the 2.5 turbo diesel in there as well, underpowered, wasn't going to go anywhere fast. So Land Rover was stuck with a problem, because now they had this investment, this move into a new avenue to try and get more contracts from the military, and it didn't work. So 11 of these llamas were now sent out into pasture, in effect, and nothing came of it, which was quite sad, because this was supposed to replace the 101 forward control. And the reason for the replacement of that, the 101 was a good tractor. It did what it's supposed to do, very good off-road. It could tug, pull, underload, anything. Super reductive gears, which was also good for the 101 anyway, with the V8. The trouble was the maintenance, because everything in the 101 is in the 101. So if you want to do some maintenance on the engine, you basically have to strip the interior apart. Even the spare wheel, right behind the driver's seat, inside, to keep the footprint compact, right? So there was that side of it as well. It was a maintenance headache, and also the nature requirements were changing. It needed to be a heavier payload and more in line with what the other countries were doing as well through Europe. So the 101 needed replacement. The Llama didn't work out. It was inherently unstable, under load, super top heavy, wasn't going to work out, because its main job was going off-road with a load. By this time, costs had spiked anyway at Land Rover, despite using a lot of shared components, and the military found it too expensive anyway, even if it was going to work, if they could figure out this instability issue. So they turned to Reynolds Borton, and Reynolds Borton came up with the RB44. And this was also an interesting story, because basically the MOD had said no more bespoke vehicles. We're going to go to COTS, commercial off the shelf, keep the cost down for the same capability and ease of use. So Reynolds Borton RB44 came out. It was based on the Dodge 50 series, 2-ton payload, 4x4 diff lock, the whole lot. It even had 2 PTOs as well, which is pretty good. Semi-cab forward design, cab over design. But basically on paper, it met the needs of the military for the price as well. The trouble was, it had huge reliability issues, for one thing. And the other one was the braking issue, which was pretty serious, where if you did brake, it would veer to the left very violently, which was not ideal. They basically pulled them out of service, even though the MOD had committed to 800 units. Reynolds was burdened with a whole lot of investment costs to try and fix this issue. But not only that, because the MOD had committed already to the project, the costs for this were split. So the MOD was now spending a huge amount of money for their cheaper version, COTS off the shelf. And it didn't really work out in the end, basically. So the MOD had basically rejected the Llama, that wasted money on the Reynolds burden, and they came up with the Pinsgauer. And if you know anything about the Pinsgauer, it is exactly a non-COTS model, which is quite interesting indeed. It makes it a lot more expensive, a lot more bespoke, a lot more maintenance heavy as well. So this whole thing was quite of this typical story of the MOD, which is what I'm uncovering slowly as we go along. They make decisions based on cost, and then it costs a lot more in the end to try and fix the problem, because there was a mistake to go that way in the first place. The upshot of this all is that the 101 forward control served way into the 90s. It was in the Gulf as well, because the replacement was never there, or never good enough to replace it. So it just kept going, kept soldiering on, if you excuse the pun. There it is. If you want to see any of these llamas, they are in the Dunsfold collection. I think they've got 5, 6 or 7 of them, of different types. Very interesting little vehicle. It didn't work out in the end, not for what it was intended for, but it's quite a quirky little thing, and also illustrates some of Land Rover's attempts to do something out of the ordinary, stray a little bit off the established path. If you want to watch something more Land Rover, link is there as usual. Links down below for the books and all of that. And I'm going to say thanks for watching. Catch you on the next one. Keep riding.